I never imagined that one day I would be telling a story like this. My name is Margaret, and I am a 58-year-old woman who spent her entire life working hard, saving every penny, and building a home I thought would be filled with love, laughter, and family. I raised my only son, Daniel, as a single mother. His father left when he was barely 2 years old, and from that moment forward, Daniel became the center of my world. Every decision I made was for him. I worked 2 jobs when he was younger, cleaning offices at night after working full-time as a secretary during the day. There were nights when I came home so exhausted I could barely stand, but the moment I saw Daniel's little face looking up at me, everything felt worth it. I wanted to give him the life I never had. I wanted him to feel secure, to know he was loved, and to never feel abandoned like I once did. And so, every paycheck, every sacrifice, every sleepless night went toward building that future. By the time Daniel was in high school, I had managed to purchase a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, no, ours. That house was a symbol of all the years of effort and determination. It was the place where Daniel grew up, where his childhood photos still hung on the walls, where birthdays were celebrated, and where I dreamed he would one day bring his own family. And then it happened, he met her. Her name was Lily. She was charming, beautiful, and at first glance, I thought she was exactly what Daniel needed. He had always been shy, a little reserved, and Lily had this energy that seemed to light up the room. I remember the first time he introduced her to me, Daniel's face glowed with pride, and I couldn't help but feel happy for him. When they got engaged, I was thrilled. I poured my heart into helping with the wedding, not because they asked me to, but because I wanted to. I thought Lily and I could build a bond, that we could become family in the truest sense of the word. I pictured Sunday dinners, grandchildren running around the yard, and a home filled once again with laughter. But soon, cracks began to appear. At first, they were subtle, small comments from Lily about how the house was a bit old-fashioned or how she couldn't wait to make it theirs. I brushed it off as excitement. She was young, and it was natural for her to want to make her mark. But the comments grew sharper over time. She began moving things around without asking, replacing family photos with her own decorations, and making remarks that stung more than she realized, or perhaps she did realize. Daniel, blinded by love, seemed not to notice. When I mentioned feeling left out of decisions in the very house I had worked so hard to provide, he told me I was overreacting. Those words cut deeper than I can describe. Overreacting? After all the years I had poured into his happiness, was I now just an obstacle in his life? I tried to ignore the growing distance, convincing myself that it was just part of the adjustment. But as time went on, I felt like a guest in my own home. Decisions were made without me, my opinions were brushed aside, and the warmth I once felt in that house began to fade. And then came the moment that shattered everything. It wasn't a single argument, not one explosive fight, it was the accumulation of small dismissals, quiet humiliations, and cold silences. One evening, as I sat in the living room reading, Lily walked in and, without a second thought, asked me why I didn't consider moving out so that they could start fresh as a married couple. Her words struck me like lightning. Move out? From my own house? I looked at Daniel, expecting him to laugh it off, to defend me, to remind her that this was the home he grew up in and that I had every right to be there. But instead, he lowered his eyes, fidgeted with his hands, and said nothing. That silence was louder than any scream could have been. I realized, in that moment, that something had shifted. I was no longer the center of Daniel's world. Lily was. And while I had prepared myself for that change in some ways, I never imagined it would mean being pushed aside, being asked to step out of the very home I had built. I didn't say much that night. I simply excused myself, went to my bedroom, and closed the door. But behind that door, I cried silently. Not just because of Lily's audacity, but because of Daniel's silence. His lack of defense. His choice to let me fade into the background of his life. That was the beginning. I didn't know it then, but the storm was only starting to brew. The little cracks in our family bond were about to widen into a chasm that would change everything. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a single thought echoed in my mind: how did it come to this? The silence in the house after that confrontation was heavier than any storm I had weathered in my lifetime. I kept waiting for my son, Michael, to speak up, to remind his wife that our family, mattered. But the longer the quiet stretched, the more I realized he wasn't going to say what I desperately hoped for. Instead, he stood in the kitchen doorway, his shoulders stiff, his gaze fixed on the floor as though the tiles might provide him with the courage he lacked. When he finally looked up, his eyes didn't hold the warmth or loyalty I had always associated with him. They held conflict, yes, but behind that, there was resignation. "Mom," he started, his voice low and uneven. "I think it's best if you take some time away from us. Just until things cool down." My heart lurched. Take some time away? This was my home, the place where I had helped him take his first steps, where I had taught him to ride his bike, where I had bandaged scraped knees and listened to adolescent heartbreaks. I had poured my life into raising him, sacrificing everything so he could have stability and love. And now, in the face of his wife's demand, he was asking me to step aside, like I was nothing more than an unwelcome guest. "Michael," I whispered, my throat tightening, "she's your wife, I understand that. But I am your mother. Do you mean to tell me that after everything, you would choose to shut me out of my grandchild's life just because she says so?" He flinched but didn't step forward. He didn't comfort me, didn't argue in my defense. His silence was louder than any declaration. "She's only trying to protect our family, Mom," he finally said. "Things have been tense. It might be better if you gave us some space." The betrayal in those words cut deeper than any blade. Protect our family? Was I no longer part of that definition? My daughter-in-law, Amanda, stood behind him, her lips pressed into a tight line, her arms crossed as though she had just won a battle. Her silence was triumphant, her posture smug. She didn't need to say anything. Michael had spoken for her, chosen for her. It was in that moment I understood the true depth of my isolation. I left their house that evening without seeing my grandchild, my heart breaking with each step toward the car. I thought about the countless nights I had stayed awake to comfort Michael when he was sick as a child. I thought about the second job I worked when his father left us, how I had gone without so he never had to. And now, the boy I had raised into a man stood united with a woman who despised me, and together they decided I wasn't fit to be part of their family. The pain was unbearable, but underneath it all, a different emotion began to stir: anger. I had worked my whole life to build something for Michael. Every cent I had saved, every asset I had invested in, it was all meant to ensure that he, and by extension, his family, would never know the struggles I had endured. My will was clear: everything I owned, from the house to the savings, was meant for him and his children. But what good was that sacrifice if my own blood could cast me aside so easily? The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I told him I wanted to make changes to my will. He raised his brows, surprised, but didn't ask questions. I explained that my estate would no longer automatically go to Michael and his family. I wanted the freedom to decide who was truly deserving. As the lawyer drafted the new terms, I thought back to Amanda's smug expression. The thought that she might one day live comfortably in the home I had paid off, using money I had scraped together through years of sacrifice, filled me with disgust. If Michael had truly chosen her over me, then perhaps he had chosen the consequences too. Later that week, when I returned home, the silence of my empty house wrapped around me differently. It was no longer the silence of loneliness, it was the silence of resolve. I had given my son everything: my love, my time, my resources. And he had betrayed me the moment it mattered most. I sat at the kitchen table that night with a cup of tea, staring at the old photograph of us together, me, Michael, and his tiny baby boy in my arms. My lips trembled, but I held back the tears. I knew I had to be strong, even if it broke me inside. Family, I realized, isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and love. And if my son couldn't give me that, then he had no right to the legacy I had built. The betrayal was complete. And though it left me shattered, it also gave me clarity. Michael had chosen his side. Now, I would choose mine. I thought I had already endured the worst pain a mother could face. My son siding with his wife and asking me to leave their home was a wound I wasn't sure would ever heal. But nothing prepared me for what came next, the day my daughter-in-law threatened to erase me from my grandchild's life entirely. It started with silence. Days passed, then weeks, with no photos, no calls, no little updates about how my grandbaby was doing. I used to receive at least a picture every other day, the tiny hand curled around a toy, the first attempts at crawling, the babbling that warmed my heart. Now, it was as if a curtain had been drawn, and I was left in total darkness. I tried reaching out gently. A text here, a voicemail there. Nothing accusatory, just, "Hi sweetie, just checking in. I miss the baby so much. Hope you're all doing okay." The responses were cold, if they came at all. A curt "we're busy," or worse, silence. Then, one afternoon, I gathered my courage and drove to their house. I didn't want to barge in, I just wanted to drop off a gift I had knitted for the baby, a little yellow sweater with tiny duck buttons. I left it on the porch and rang the bell, stepping back so I wouldn't intrude. My daughter-in-law opened the door, her face tight with irritation. "Why are you here?" she asked flatly. I held up the sweater like a peace offering. "I just wanted to give this to the baby. I thought maybe." She cut me off. "We don't need your things. And honestly, it's better if you stop coming around. You're making things harder." Her words stung, but I stayed calm. I only want to be part of their life. That's all. She sighed, exasperated, then delivered the blow that shattered me. "If you don't back off, I'll make sure you never see your grandchild again. Not now, not ever. I'll erase you from their life completely, erase me." That word echoed in my mind like a death sentence. I felt my knees weaken, my throat tighten. This wasn't just anger speaking, she meant it. The look in her eyes told me she held all the power, and she relished reminding me of it. I stumbled back to my car, clutching the sweater as if it were a lifeline. The drive home blurred through tears. All I could think was, how did it come to this? That night, I sat alone in my quiet house, surrounded by memories. The framed photo of my son as a child grinning with missing teeth. The drawing he had made for me in second grade that said, "Best mom ever." The countless sacrifices I had made so he could have a better life, working 2 jobs, skipping meals, putting my dreams aside. And now, he had allowed this woman to strip me of the one joy left in my later years, the chance to love and nurture my grandchild. I barely slept. Every creak of the house seemed to whisper, "You're losing everything." The next day, I received a text from my son. "Mom, please stop showing up unannounced. It stresses her out. Just give us space for now." Space. That word was another knife. Space between me and my grandchild. Space between me and the boy I raised. Space between me and the life I had built. I felt trapped. If I pushed too hard, I risked losing them entirely. If I stayed quiet, I would slowly fade into irrelevance, a ghost in my own family's story. The breaking point wasn't just her threat, it was the realization that my son wouldn't stop her. He would let her erase me. He already was. For weeks, I wandered through my days in a haze of grief and anger. I thought of writing letters, begging for forgiveness, though I didn't even know what I was supposed to be sorry for. I thought of hiring a lawyer, but I knew how messy and ugly that could get. And then, one afternoon as I sat at the kitchen table staring at a pile of old family documents, my eyes fell on my will. In it, everything I had worked for, my home, my savings, my small but hard-earned estate, was set to go to my son and his family. I had written it years ago, before the baby, before the tension, back when I trusted that love would be enough to keep us close. But love, it seemed, wasn't enough anymore. I picked up the pen, my hands trembling. The anger that had been simmering inside me turned into something sharper, clearer. If they wanted to erase me, maybe it was time I erased them from my legacy. I wasn't impulsive. I thought long and hard that night. But the words of my daughter-in-law kept replaying in my mind, "I'll erase you." And I realized, I couldn't let her win. This wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the sliver of control I still had. They might keep me from my grandchild's life, but they couldn't dictate what I did with my own. That night, I folded up the yellow sweater with the duck buttons and placed it gently in a box. On top, I set the will, untouched for years. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of clarity. If she truly wanted to erase me, then she would learn the cost of erasing a mother who gave everything, and still had something left to take back. The breaking point had come. And soon, the turning point would follow. I sat alone in my study, staring at the thick envelope that held my last will and testament. For years, I had carefully planned everything, every detail of how my estate would be passed down. I wanted to leave behind a legacy for my son, his wife, and, most importantly, my grandchild. But now, as the silence of the house pressed down on me, I realized something. The people I had entrusted with my legacy had already erased me from theirs. The betrayal ran deep. My own daughter-in-law had the audacity to ban me from seeing my grandchild, as if I were some kind of danger or nuisance. My son, the boy I raised, stood by her side and turned his back on me. It wasn't just cruel, it was unforgivable. I opened the will slowly, my hands trembling not with fear, but with a fire I hadn't felt in years. Every line of that document was a gift I had intended for them, my home, my savings, even family heirlooms passed down through generations. But what good was leaving them everything if they had already treated me as nothing? The rage built inside me, but beneath it was clarity. Why should I reward people who had discarded me so easily? Why should my years of sacrifice, my hard work, and my love be handed to those who only saw me as an inconvenience? With a single, deliberate motion, I tore the first page in half. The ripping sound was sharp, almost liberating. Piece by piece, I shredded the will until nothing remained but scraps tattered across my desk. With every tear, it felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself they had tried to take away. I wasn't just destroying paper. I was destroying the future they thought they had secured. My son and his wife assumed my estate was theirs to inherit, but now it would go to someone worthy. Maybe a charity, maybe even distant relatives who actually cared, or maybe I would spend every last penny enjoying the life they thought they controlled. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. They might have banned me from my grandchild's life, but they could never control my legacy. My revenge wasn't loud or violent, it was silent, powerful, and final. They wanted me erased, but in tearing up that will, I erased them instead. After tearing up the will, I finally felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without the crushing pressure of betrayal pressing down on me. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could reclaim my life on my own terms. The next morning, I began taking steps to ensure the consequences of my decision would ripple in ways my daughter-in-law and son would notice. I called my lawyer to draft a new plan, one that allocated my estate to causes and people I trusted, those who had always supported me, who had shown loyalty and love, even in small ways. The thought of them eventually benefiting from what my son and his wife assumed was theirs gave me a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't malicious, it was justice. Meanwhile, word of my bold move reached my son and his wife through channels I didn't intend. They realized I had legally altered the inheritance, effectively cutting them off from the legacy they had assumed would be theirs. The calls began soon after, tentative, angry, pleading. "Mom, you can't do this." Michael's voice cracked over the phone. "Please, we need." "I think it's clear who really needs to respect boundaries," I said firmly. "You chose her over me. You made your decision." I felt no guilt. Only the simmering sense of empowerment that comes when you stop being a victim and start being the architect of your own life. They had tried to erase me, and I had reclaimed my power in a way they couldn't undo. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, I noticed the changes not just in my family, but in myself. I began exploring parts of life I had put on hold while dedicating everything to raising my son. I took long walks, rediscovered old hobbies, and even joined a local community group that shared my passion for volunteering. The house, once a place of conflict, became a haven. I laughed more freely, my heart lighter, my mind clearer. And then, unexpectedly, came a small glimmer of what I had been missing. My grandchild, still young enough to not understand the tension, came to me through supervised visits arranged quietly by a relative who had always been in my corner. The joy on that little face, the innocent smile that didn't know of the betrayal, reminded me why I had fought so hard, not for revenge, but for connection. I realized something profound: true power doesn't come from wealth or control over others. It comes from self-respect, dignity, and knowing your worth even when others deny it. By tearing up the will, I had taken back the one thing they thought they controlled, my influence over my own life. And in doing so, I rediscovered my own happiness. Looking back, I saw that the events leading up to this point, my son siding with his wife, the threats, the exclusion, had all been catalysts. They forced me to recognize who truly valued me and who did not. They forced me to prioritize myself and to stop giving my energy to those who would take it for granted. My daughter-in-law. She eventually realized that her attempts to control me had failed. My son, too, faced the reality that loyalty isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. In the end, their actions left them with less than they expected, while I emerged stronger, more aware, and undeniably in charge of my life. I also learned a lesson about love and family. Blood alone doesn't guarantee loyalty. Care, respect, and gratitude are earned, not owed. And sometimes, walking away, or tearing up what you once thought they deserved, is the only way to truly protect yourself. Now, the house that had once been the battleground of betrayal is my refuge. I fill it with laughter, music, and memories that I choose to create, not dictated by anyone else. I still love my son, even if he stumbled, even if he allowed someone else to dictate his choices. But I love myself too, and that love is non-negotiable. And if anyone ever doubts the power of reclaiming your own life, I only need to point to this moment. Tearing up that will wasn't just a legal action. It was a declaration. A declaration that no one, no spouse, no child, no family member, has the right to erase you from your own existence. As I sit here now, watching my grandchild play in the sunlight streaming through my living room windows, I finally understand the awakening I have experienced. True peace comes not from demanding respect from those who deny it, but from giving yourself the respect you deserve. And if my son or his wife is watching this story unfold, I hope they understand one thing: you can choose to erase someone from your life, but you cannot erase their spirit, their will, or their power. That belongs to them, forever. I survived betrayal. I reclaimed my home. I reshaped my legacy. And in the quiet aftermath, I found something more valuable than wealth or possession: the knowledge that I am enough, that I am strong, and that I am finally free.